European countries. The other time when I was here with Eva then, I met the Deputy Prosecutor General, former Deputy Prosecutor General of the ICC. And one of the things that he said was that in prosecuting matters in international law, it may seem difficult, but the good part of international law is that you can pull so many legal instruments together and get something binding. So, in respect of the law, we think we're onto something. Very much so. From 1850 upwards, the instruments that Germany and others signed, they're important reference points to tell us that in a court of law, it will stand the test of time. But you asked about the question of land. Now, human lives we can't go and get back. We can't. We are talking about skulls and things like that we can get back. We need those skulls back. I mean, my great-grandfather, Fredericks, was one of those that was slaughtered by the Germans, and we are still looking for his skull here, somewhere. Someone must give us that skull back. But land and cattle and goats and sheep, oh yes, they are there in Namibia. We just cut the wire, as we were telling the other colleagues, and go get the cattle, go get the sheep, go get the land, and we can solve it. Very simple. But we are also law-abiding citizens, and we try to follow the law as much as possible. One of the good things that colonizers knew was that they must apply the law. So when they started to settle, already in 1895, they had two decrees. One that created the communal reserves, in other words, one law that already expropriated land of the herero and the Nama, and then another decree that led to the sequestration of all land, cattle, all land and all properties of the indigenous people. So you had two instruments, two decrees that were used to take livestock and land and all other properties, including women, from the hereros and the Namas, and exactly transfer that wealth in the hands of the German settlers. The challenge that you have is when you have, and the professor spoke yesterday about the law has not answered many things. The law is stupid. I'm not so sure whether I agree with the professor that the law is stupid. Perhaps the law is conservative, but stupid it ain't, because the human agents that must implement the provisions of the law, those ones are often the ones that are either stupid, they don't understand it, and they are cowardice. If you look at the decrees that von Trotter issued under the instructions of Kaiser Wilhelm, or those decrees that were issued by the Kaiser himself, who had a problem with one of his arms, who was a brutal guy. He was actually a little bit of a madman, I'm reading, a very crazy guy who had emotional issues. I wanted to see at least a picture of him. Must have been a very ugly guy, I must say. If you look at the European colonial enterprise, they promulgated their stupid laws, according to the professor, but they implemented those laws, no matter what. So you had those provisions first to take the livestock and the land, and then they reduce it further into ordinances to say specific groups, the Swart boys, where I come from, the Fredericks, the Fransman, specific groups of Namas, we must take livestock. The Eastern Herero, they took livestock, and so on. Just to give you an idea, by 1914, let me just verify the date. By 1914, 1902, by the way, the hereros were only left with 46,000 cattle out of 50,000 cattle. And the settlers had about 46,000 cattle. You can see the transfer of wealth. So the laws were used to take property. You will see I'm just vacillating between that period and now. Now, when you now come to independence, and now you have this Western liberal constitutions, you have a government. The law provides for expropriation with just compensation. And some of you are law students, and professor will say the law does not look at the economic monopolies that you need to break down. We dealt with the political ones, but we do not deal with the economic ones. The law provides, for instance, in the Constitution for expropriation. What do you expropriate? You expropriate land with just compensation and for public interest. If the law is not used to correct an economic imbalance, is it the problem of the law or is it the problem of the implementers? Is the law stupid or are the implementers stupid or unwilling? You are students, you'll have to ask that question yourself. Ask your professors. Because professors, you know, sometimes they are in another world. And I respect them, of course. Now, let's go back again. Remember, I will take you back and forth so that you, be with me on this issue, back and forth. Now, the Germans targeted specific communities, Mr. Moderator. They didn't target the Ovambo and the Kavango and the Zambezi. The German commentators say that because the Ovambos were 150,000, the Germans were afraid to tackle them because they were not militarily strong. That's a lie. Mr. Ulenga comes from the government of the Republic of Namibia. He's the deputy ambassador sent here to perhaps spy on us. I'm seeing he's writing. Let him write. They just never had anything to offer to the Germans. There was malaria, land was not fertile, water was scarce, there were no minerals, and until today you can see that the south of the red line, that the Germans put a line dividing the country in a north and south zone. The north, close to Angola, still they cannot export livestock to Europe. South of the red line, where the herero and the Nama and the Damara left, that's the economic powerhouse of Namibia. Yes. Has always been. You can't argue it. Diamonds, everything, good livestock, sheep, fish, it's from the southern part of the country. So the Germans had no interest to go upward. So they had to deal with 89.3 million hectares of land. When they settled by 1915, Germany had given the settlers about 1,331 farms. And in 1914, when they did a census as to the wealth of the Germans, Germans are very efficient. They were good at killing very fast. They were good at enriching Germans also very quickly. 1914, when they did a census as to how rich the Germans are, the settlers that just came yesterday, they found that those that came yesterday were 20 million marks rich. 14 million of that 20 million was cattle and other livestock that they took from the hereros and the namas. In 1914, therefore, by law, which was brutally implemented, someone was $20 million or marks rich, someone was 20 million marks poor. We know who was rich, we know who was poor. In total, during a war period where they were killing people, and some Germans were also killed, of course, in 25 years, Germans took about 13.4 million hectares of land. Let me put that in perspective. The government of the Republic of Namibia, represented by Mr. Ulenga here, in 27 years, only bought 3.1 million hectares of land in a time of peace, with laws available at their disposal to expropriate land for purposes of returning land in a time of peace. In other words, when you can do whatever you are allowed to do. Besides that, you have 2/3 majority. In other words, you have this super majority, not like poor Angela Merkel that has to fall around seeking for coalition partners. You have a 2/3 majority out of 96 parliamentary seats. You have 77 seats. That's how big you are. Law is politics. Politics is law. Let me now go back to you about why Germany did not go to the north. I told you there was nothing in the north. There remains nothing in the north except cheap labor, where Ulenga comes from. Now, the government, of course, is dominated by people from an ethnic group that comes from the north, that never lost a single inch of land, that never lost a single life. They claim that apparently Nehale went to